Hi, I'm Maelis. At my own family's dinner table, my father raised a glass and called me a freeloader, in front of everyone. No joke, no hesitation. Just years of silence turned into a public insult. But the next day, his boss stood in a room full of executives, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Good morning, ma'am." Why was I invisible in my own family, but respected by the people they desperately wanted to impress? What happens when the one they dismissed turns out to outrank them all? The moment I pulled into the driveway, the porch light flickered just like it used to, always a beat behind, like it wasn't sure whether to welcome me or warn me away. The air had that soft bite of early fall, crisp and quiet. I stepped out of the car, heels crunching the gravel, and took a long breath. It had been years, but everything looked preserved, like a snapshot no one dared update. Inside, the smell was the same, lemons and old wood polish. The hallway still had that squeaky third plank I used to skip as a kid. And the photos, lined up with mathematical precision. Baby pictures of Gregory, high school awards, family vacations, but none of me in uniform, not one. Not even a graduation shot, like I had been cropped out of our collective memory. Arthur was already pacing the living room, phone to his ear, glancing at his watch every few seconds. Gregory, as expected, stood by the mantel, wine glass in hand, animatedly describing some leadership theory he'd borrowed from a podcast. Vera, ever the orchestrator, fluttered out of the kitchen. Her smile was practiced. "Well, look who finally showed," she said. Not a hug, not a real greeting, just a mild surprise I hadn't vanished completely. I nodded. "Good to see you too, Mom." Her eyes flicked toward Gregory. "Go on in. We've got a slideshow for your brother's big promotion. He made senior project lead last quarter. Impressive, right?" "Of course," I said, offering a polite smile. The dining room had been dressed up. Candles, place settings, even a little podium for speeches. My name wasn't on any card. I didn't expect it to be. I took the last seat at the edge of the table, beside the kitchen doorway, half hidden behind the server cart. From here, I could see it all without being seen. Dinner began with fanfare. Gregory took center stage in every anecdote. Every laugh seemed to orbit around him. I ate quietly, listening, waiting. At some point, Vera leaned over and whispered, "Sorry we forgot to send you the invite. Assumed you were too busy." I didn't bother correcting her. There was no forgot. I had texted a week ago, told her I was flying in. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Arthur stood and tapped his glass. "To Gregory," he started, "for rising through merit, not shortcuts." Everyone clapped. Gregory raised his glass in faux modesty. Arthur continued, "Some people take initiative, others just coast along. And freeloading, well, that only works until people wise up." Heads turned. Laughter bubbled. Forks paused mid-air. Someone snorted behind a napkin. I froze. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. The silence after his words wrapped around me like a noose. I felt my spine straighten, hands steadying the knife next to my plate. Gregory chuckled low. "Well said, Dad." I said nothing, didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked. Not loud, but sharp and clean. I stared down at my plate, watching the candlelight flicker in the gravy. This wasn't new. This was a rerun. I remembered all the other times, forgotten birthdays, skipped ceremonies, the quiet corrections they'd make when I talked about my work, always downplaying anything outside their corporate comfort zone. The scholarship mistake. That's what they used to call it behind closed doors when I joined the ROTC. Could have been a lawyer, they said, or worked for Deloitte. Vera leaned in again. "Let's not ruin this night. It's Gregory's moment." Of course it was. I nodded. Not in agreement, in calculation. After dessert, I slipped away from the table, stepped into the hallway. The laughter echoed behind me as I pulled out my phone, tapping through the secure portal from work. Tomorrow's agenda was already uploaded. Defense contract review, military-civilian integration. There it was, My name, listed in bold, Malis Wainwright, Principal Advisor, Cybersecurity Division. They had no idea. I stared at the screen for a second longer, the glow reflecting off the framed family photo beside me, one where I had been cropped out, long ago. I whispered to myself, voice flat but certain. Let's see who freeloads who tomorrow. The slideshow started with the familiar click of an old remote and a jittery transition into Gregory's curated legacy. He stood beside the screen like a proud professor, chin lifted slightly, as if the story it told was universally agreed upon. Everyone leaned in. I leaned back. The first image was of him in a graduation gown. College, not high school. The next was him shaking hands with some executive I didn't recognize. Then came office photos, posed in pressed shirts at company retreats, corner office shots, him presenting something to someone important. They even had background music playing, like it was a marketing reel for a man already declared a success. I watched quietly, until slide 9. It was a group shot, his first corporate startup pitch. I remembered that one. I'd helped finance it, quietly. An early angel check written under my personal LLC to avoid scrutiny. I'd been in that photo. I knew exactly where I stood. In the left corner, hand on the whiteboard, face half turned. Except now, I wasn't. The photo had been cropped. You could still see my arm, just the sleeve edge and the outline of a wristwatch I no longer owned. That was it. A surgically erased presence. A deliberate vanishing. I didn't flinch. I sipped my wine. Vera clapped at the next picture like she was the mother of a movie star. I kept breathing. Let's raise a glass, she announced, lifting hers high. To Leora for making tonight possible. The food, the wine, the decorations. You really outdid yourself, sweetheart. The room echoed with polite affirmations. She's always so thoughtful, someone said. I turned to Leora. She didn't look at me right away, just stared at her glass. When she finally did glance over, it was brief, apologetic. But her mouth didn't move. Not one correction. Not even a shrug. Weeks ago, I had wired Vera a few thousand. She insisted they were running tight with Gregory's new car purchase and the catering down payment. But she hadn't wanted Arthur to know she asked me, so I sent it through Leora's account. Discreet, untraceable. Family, right? I raised my glass too. To Leora, I said, voice steady. Gregory stood again. He loved standing during toasts. I always tell my team, ideas are nice, but success is about showing up. No one remembers who had the idea. They remember who signed the deal. Chuckles, laughter, a slow clap from someone in sales. Eyes slid toward me. Not hard stares, just passing glances, measuring, confirming. I didn't exist in this story, and they were all fine with that. I looked at Gregory. He was grinning, holding court, comfortable, untouchable. I wanted to ask, so when I funded your first prototype, was I showing up, or just writing a check from the shadows? But I didn't. I just tilted my glass, took another small sip. Leora reached for a napkin, dropped it, bent to pick it up. She didn't look at me again. And that was the thing, wasn't it? They all benefited from the version of the truth that left me out. My existence was inconvenient to the narrative. A woman in uniform doesn't fit the country club success story. They wanted Gregory to be self-made, so they had to make sure no one remembered the sister who helped him start. When the slideshow ended, everyone clapped again. I smiled, lips only. My fingers found their way to my purse under the table. I got up quietly, slipped into the kitchen, and found a pen by the phone. There was a stack of folded dinner napkins, one of them still crisp and unused. I pulled it free, smoothed it flat, and wrote 2 words across the linen. Military review. I folded it, slid it into my bag, and walked back to the table like nothing happened. As I sat down, I whispered under my breath, "Tomorrow, no cropping me out." The dishes clinked softly as I stacked them, one over the other, in rhythm with the silence that had settled in the kitchen. No one had asked me to help. No one noticed that I did. It was just something ingrained in me from years of living in this house. When you're overlooked, you move in the background. I rinsed a fork, wiped it, and set it gently in the tray. My fingers moved with mechanical precision, but my mind drifted back to a winter 8 years ago. I had sent my father a prototype I designed during my time in an early military R&D unit. It was a compact navigation module that eventually became the standard for secure vehicle communication across multiple divisions. But back then, it was just a polished set of blueprints in a neat envelope with a handwritten note. Thought you might have fun testing this. He never replied. A week later, I called to check if it had arrived. Vera answered, said Arthur was busy. And honestly, Melis, she added, you should focus on a career that's a little more grounded. All this tech talk, it's over people's heads. So I let it go. Filed it away under things they pretend not to understand. As I dried my hands, I heard chuckling from the living room. Gregory again, bragging about a client dinner or a product launch, something he probably rehearsed in front of his mirror. I walked out and leaned against the entryway near the fireplace, pretending to check my phone. That's when I heard it. Oh, Arthur, an older man's voice, Mr. Rylan, a longtime family friend. That design piece you gave me last year? Still have it on my desk. Everyone asks where I got it. It's brilliant. Arthur let out a modest laugh. Glad you liked it. Rare find, that one. I turned my head. Sitting beside the hearth was a polished wooden box with a metal edge and embedded microcircuit. Not a decoration. It was my prototype. Slightly modified, sure, but unmistakable. He had rewrapped my invention and handed it off as a novelty gift. I walked closer. Not a word. Just stood there, looking at it like I'd never seen it before. Rylan nodded toward it. That thing? I swear, it's like something out of DARPA. I looked at Arthur. He met my eyes for a brief second, just enough for me to see he knew I knew. Then he looked away. No explanation, no acknowledgement. I stepped outside. The air was cold and dry. My breath fogged as I stared at the yard I once mowed every Saturday morning. Lights glowed from the dining room. Laughter carried faintly through the walls. Did they remember what I'd done? What I'd built? Or was it just easier to pretend I had never done anything at all? They didn't want the story of the daughter who worked with classified materials, or the one who filed 4 patents before 30. They wanted Gregory's clean, predictable climb. My narrative didn't fit their framing, but that didn't mean I was going to stay quiet forever. Back upstairs, I opened my briefcase and pulled out tomorrow's project specs. The contract Pinnacle had just entered was built on a foundation I helped design. My name wasn't on the public documents, but the source code in the security layer was mine. Unchanged, uncredited, but traceable. I didn't need their applause. I just needed them to finally sit at a table where I held the pen. I tucked the folder back in, clicked the latches, and reached for the envelope I kept tucked into the interior side pocket. The original patent registration. Still valid. Still mine. Setting my alarm for 5:45 a.m., I placed it beside the briefcase, slipped the envelope into my purse, and whispered to myself in the dark, if they refuse to remember me, I'll make it impossible to forget me. I pulled into the parking lot just as the sun broke the horizon. The light skimmed across the glass facade of Pinnacle Defense's regional headquarters, reflecting off steel edges like a silent warning. My tires rolled into the designated military liaison space, clearly marked, deliberately chosen. I stepped out in full uniform, regulation cut, polished brass, not a costume, not a message, just protocol. 2 employees walking by slowed, glanced, then kept moving with eyes lowered. The security guard at the entrance, a younger man with too much starch in his collar, straightened when he saw me. Good morning, Colonel Wainwright, he said, then tapped his earpiece. She's here, I nodded once. Thank you. No need for more. Inside, the lobby buzzed with nervous energy. Coffee cups, elevator dings, the usual shuffle of people preparing for high-stakes reviews. I didn't look around. I knew who'd be waiting. Sure enough, Gregory stood with Arthur near the reception desk, both in matching navy blazers. Their posture told me everything, relaxed, expectant. They were still talking about who the military rep might be. Arthur, always the authority, was probably speculating something along the lines of some out-of-touch Pentagon bureaucrat. And then the elevator doors opened. I stepped out. The silence hit instantly. Gregory's eyes flicked to my rank first. He didn't recognize my face. Arthur looked twice. His mouth opened, closed, then twisted slightly. "What are you doing here dressed like that?" he asked, tone caught between accusation and embarrassment. I checked my watch. "Your meeting starts in 20 minutes. You should get ready." I didn't wait for a response, just walked past them without looking back. The conference floor was quiet. The CEO's assistant met me outside the executive war room. She smiled quickly. "Colonel, we've got your place set. Nameplate's already up." I entered. The room was sleek, modern. High ceilings, frosted glass, expensive lighting pretending to be subtle. My name was there at the front corner. Colonel Malus Wainwright, Key Liaison, Department of Defense. I placed my briefcase down and reviewed the presentation slides laid out on the main display. My module, Secure Comms Overlay, was slide 5. No one here would know it was mine. That had always been the deal. Or at least it was, until someone started poking where they shouldn't. Just as I was syncing my notes, a message buzzed on the secure work tablet. It was from IT. Simple. Quiet. Unusual login detected. Last night. Access point. Pinnacle HQ IP. File accessed. Internal military contract. Review. V2. PDF. Only one person in this building had both motive and misplaced confidence. Gregory. I didn't react. Didn't type back. Just flagged it for audit and mentally added it to the list. No confrontation. Not here. Not yet. The room began to fill. Senior engineers, corporate officers, civilian contractors. I stood for a moment, letting the discomfort of my presence settle over them like a low fog. Several nodded politely. One man offered me coffee. I declined. Arthur stepped in a few minutes later, eyes darting everywhere but mine. Gregory followed, fiddling with his tablet, trying too hard to appear calm. I noticed how his eyes lingered on the seating chart, confused. He hadn't expected me to be seated at the head quadrant. As the CEO entered, the room stilled. Chairs shuffled. She nodded once at me, respectfully, then turned toward the crowd. And that's when Arthur leaned toward me, voice low and stiff. "So, are you here to observe?" I looked at him, really looked. "No," I said. "I'm here to approve." I opened my folder. The room hushed, like someone had cut the air itself. I had just stepped out of the prep room when I saw her. Vera, walking toward me, with that strained expression she always wore when pretending to be warm. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, as if even her footsteps didn't want to draw attention. She glanced over her shoulder before stopping in front of me, hand already reaching into her purse. "Sweetheart," she said, lowering her voice. I didn't want you to feel left out today." She slipped a small white envelope into my hand, fingers brushing mine with deliberate softness. "Use this for yourself. Get a coffee, a new blouse, something nice. Just maybe stay toward the back of the room so Gregory doesn't feel distracted." She smiled like she'd done something generous, then turned and walked away before I could say anything. I didn't open it right away. 10 minutes later, alone in the side hallway, I slid a finger under the flap. Inside, a folded receipt for petty cash withdrawal from the department budget. $100, labeled guest discretionary. She'd handed me embezzled money disguised as kindness, as if buying my silence was something casual, thoughtful, even. I refolded the envelope and tucked it into my inner coat pocket, not to keep it, but to log it. I had already forwarded the earlier IT flag about Gregory's unauthorized access. Now this. They weren't just trying to erase me, they were trying to pay me off. Back in the conference room, I moved to my assigned seat, still at the table's front section, under the Department of Defense nameplate. The same spot Vera had asked me to avoid. Gregory was at the other end, flipping through his notes on a company-issued tablet. When he saw me lay my folder down, he gave a forced laugh, loud enough for nearby staff to hear. "What's in the folder, Melis? More Army trivia? Gonna give us a quiz?" A few of the junior staffers chuckled. They weren't sure if they were supposed to laugh, but they did. I said nothing. Instead, I calmly opened the folder, flipped it once, and placed a document face up on the table. The gold Pentagon seal glinted under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't showmanship, it was jurisdiction. The laughter died. No one asked what was inside after that. Once the room cleared for a break, I found Arthur standing at the espresso station, swirling his cup with all the concentration of a man trying to avoid looking up. I stood beside him, quiet for a moment. Then, "One more stunt like that," I said, voice low but firm. "And it won't be a family matter anymore. It'll be federal." He turned slowly, face paling just a bit. "You wouldn't do that to your own father." "I wouldn't do that to any father," I replied. "But I would absolutely do it to a man misusing federal funds and compromising a defense contract, and I'm authorized to do so." He didn't respond, just stood there, coffee forgotten, staring into a future he hadn't planned for. I walked back to the prep room, closed the door behind me, and took a slow breath. My hands were steady, my pulse calm. I wasn't fueled by anger anymore. What powered me now was precision. I checked my watch. 11:57. I buttoned the top of my jacket, adjusted the collar, and slid the compliance envelope into a labeled folder. No dramatics, just preparation. They thought they were playing politics. I was preparing a briefing. Outside, I heard the shuffling of people settling back into their seats. I glanced at the day's roster, printed and posted near the main monitor. Presenter 1, Gregory Delane. I walked toward the front row, straightened my spine, and sat with purpose. Let's see how well he does without the stolen answers. The conference room was already 3/4 full when I arrived, the hum of conversation just loud enough to obscure the subtle tension in the air. I moved toward my seat without breaking stride, though my eyes scanned the layout automatically. The chairs were arranged in a horseshoe, with placards lined neatly along the table. I found mine quickly. Guest of Arthur Melwood. I stared at it for one long, slow breath. I didn't touch it. Before I could react, the CEO entered through the side door. Shannon Murphy, sharp as ever in tailored black, with that calm, unblinking presence only women in male-dominated industries seem to master. She looked at me, then at the placard. Without saying a word, she picked it up, tore it in half, and pulled a pen from her pocket. She wrote, "Colonel Melis Wainwright, key partner," then slid it into place in front of me, like it had been there all along. The air shifted. People who hadn't looked at me before looked now. A few moments later, Shannon addressed the room. "Let's begin." She turned first to me and said, clearly, directly, in front of everyone, "Good morning, ma'am. We're honored to have you here." Every sound in the room ceased at once. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed quieter. Coffee cups hovered in midair. Typing stopped. Gregory's hand froze on his keyboard. His jaw twitched. Arthur didn't blink. Probably couldn't. He sat straight, stone-faced, jaw tight enough to crack. I nodded once and opened my notes. Without ceremony, I began outlining the integration scope for the cybersecurity module that had already been tested with 3 government partners. I noted discrepancies in projected timelines, pointed out underfunded sublayers, and proposed a shift in oversight structure, all in under 5 minutes. No one interrupted. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't showing off. I was simply working. Across the room, I saw Gregory squirm. He raised his hand, then lowered it before anyone could call on him. Arthur started scribbling in his notepad. Nonsense, I could tell by the angle. He was stalling, avoiding eye contact. Someone near the back whispered just loud enough for it to carry. "Wait, I thought she was Arthur's assistant or something." The irony could have choked a lesser person. I continued as if I hadn't heard, laying out the next phase deliverables, the reporting structure, and the layered access requirements for internal staff. When I paused, let it breathe, let them shift in their chairs. Then I looked up and said casually, "Just a reminder, all personnel clearance levels must match their actual project roles. Mislabeling leads to operational risk." The words landed like a dropped file folder in a silent room. No one spoke. Not even Vera, who fumbled her pen, dropped it, and had to bend down to retrieve it with fingers that seemed slower than usual. I closed the folder without making a sound. The breakout session was scheduled to begin shortly after. As people started to gather their notes and rise, I stood, adjusted the crease on my sleeve, and turned toward the exit. Gregory stopped beside me, his face caught somewhere between pale and flushed. "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I leaned just close enough to make sure only he could hear me. "You never asked," I said. "You just assumed." After lunch, the temperature in the conference room dropped, figuratively. People smiled less, nodded less, watched more. Something had shifted, and they knew it, even if they didn't yet understand the weight of it. I returned to my seat with quiet intention. Gregory sat 2 chairs down, flipping through slides on his tablet like it was a routine Tuesday. His hands trembled slightly. Maybe he thought it was caffeine. I knew better. The chair next to me remained empty longer than the others. Eventually, the COO filled it, eyes darting between the printed agenda and me. "Colonel," he nodded, slightly stiff. I returned it with a cool smile and set my unopened folder on the table. I could feel their curiosity orbiting around it like a planet with no gravity. Gregory's name popped onto the screen. Next up, System Protocol Overview, presented by Gregory Delane, Senior Technical Lead. He stood, shoulders squared, clearing his throat in the practiced rhythm of a man used to being heard. His second slide came up, a diagram of the secure communication interface layered within the new architecture. My architecture. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt rudely. I simply lifted my hand and spoke clearly. "That slide," I said, "was authored under the ID MRW Unit 43, submitted via encrypted channel to the Department of Defense 11 months ago. File hash and timestamp confirm origin." The silence was instantaneous and surgical. Gregory froze mid-gesture. "What?" I stood, opened my folder for the first time, and retrieved a printed document. Original source code metadata, notarized by the Federal Project Registrar. I handed it to the COO. "You've been using my framework," I said calmly. "I never asked for credit. Until now." I reached back into the folder and pulled out a copy of the Phase-I contract, printed on thick cream paper, sealed and countersigned. "M. Wainwright," I said, tapping the signature line. "Initial strategic investor, security consultant. This signature has been in your system for nearly 2 years." Gregory took a step back, eyes darting like he was searching for a door that didn't exist. Arthur cleared his throat. There must be some misunderstanding. I didn't give him the grace of eye contact. "There isn't." The COO leaned closer to the document, his brows furrowed. "Timestamp and digital chain checks out. It's hers. Fully." Vera said nothing. Neither did Gregory. I sat down without another word. The room stayed still longer than expected, like it wasn't sure how to restart after a system crash. Gregory finally returned to his seat, shoulders hunched, face expressionless. Not even an apology. That was fine. I didn't want one. Let them sit with the truth. Let them taste the weight of being wrong, not just morally, but legally, professionally, structurally. Not bitterness, just consequence. The COO spoke again, something about next steps, future planning. I didn't really hear him. My mind had already moved on. A few minutes later, Shannon, the CEO, walked over quietly. She didn't lean down, didn't lower her voice much. Would you be willing to address the executive board tomorrow morning? I closed the folder. I'd prefer today. The plaque was taller than I expected. Brushed steel, matte finish, mounted on the main wall between the executive boardroom and the internal media center. The kind of display that was hard to ignore, even harder to pretend hadn't always been there. Shannon, the CEO, waited until the very end of the day to unveil it. Most of the contractors had already left, but the executives stayed. So did the board. Arthur, Gregory, and Vera stood among them, all stiff and silent as Shannon stepped forward and pulled the cover free. National Partnership Heroes, the heading read. My name was not at the bottom. It wasn't tucked in with the others. It was centered. My photo was from a formal ceremony, one I never told my family about because they were too busy to attend. Full uniform, silver insignia gleaming. The caption below it read, Invisible until it mattered. Then, irreplaceable. There was no applause, no gasps, just silence. But it wasn't the kind born of confusion or dismissal. It was the silence of recognition. Someone behind me whispered, She's the one who ran that Aegis prototype in Georgia. I thought that was internal. A camera clicked. Someone from PR was already taking new shots for the press release. Another pulled out their phone, murmuring that legal needed to sign off on the wording. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Arthur stared at the plaque like it had personally betrayed him. His arms hung at his sides, unmoving. Vera stood too far behind him to pretend pride, too close to feign ignorance. Gregory muttered something that didn't quite reach my ears. Something like, We should have seen this coming. No one replied. Shannon turned to me shortly after. Got 5 minutes? She asked, casual but firm. Her office was quiet. She poured water for both of us, then sat across the table. I'd like you to stay on longer, she said. Advisor capacity, not just for this contract. I smiled softly. Not because I'm bitter, Shannon, but I can't. She raised an eyebrow. Because of them? Because they'd ask why I didn't say anything sooner, and I'm not interested in explaining to people who decided they knew me better than I did. She nodded once, slowly. Some things speak loudest when said by others. We shook hands. She didn't press. As I stepped into the hallway again, the energy had shifted. People nodded now, not out of politeness, but respect. That kind that can't be manufactured. Gregory and Arthur were still near the main doors. I passed them without stopping, but Vera followed. She didn't call my name, just walked beside me quietly for a few steps. If you'd told us what you were really doing, she said, eyes brimming, we would have been proud. I stopped. No, I answered calmly. You would have told me to stop. Her face crumpled. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She just stood there. Outside the boardroom, I saw a young intern standing in front of the plaque, eyes wide, backpack still slung over one shoulder. When she noticed me walking by, she asked, Was that really you? It still is, I replied. I didn't look back. As I walked toward the elevator, I heard my voice echo inside my head, soft but solid. They called me a freeloader, but today, they work for my standard. The elevator closed. Later that evening, just before the janitor turned off the main hallway lights, Arthur stood alone in front of the plaque. His coat hung over his arm, his mouth pressed into a line. You never needed us, did you? He whispered. Somewhere inside that space, my voice answered him, low and steady. I only needed to stop needing your permission. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen, stirring a pot of tomato bisque. The scent of garlic and thyme curled through the condo like an old friend. The knock came right on time. Not eager, not hesitant, just scheduled. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Arthur stood first, holding a bottle of wine awkwardly in one hand and a framed magazine clipping in the other. Vera was behind him, carrying a Tupperware dish wrapped in foil. Gregory trailed a step back, empty-handed but freshly shaved. "Smells good," Arthur offered, voice gravelly but soft. "We brought—" He paused. "Well, we weren't sure what to bring." I stepped aside. "Come in." It was just a Wednesday. No holiday, no birthday. Just a moment someone, somewhere, had decided was overdue. The living room was clean, but lived in. No military decor on the walls, just books, plants, and a small abstract painting over the mantel. They took it all in as they moved through the space. Dinner was fine, quiet, careful. Gregory complimented the soup twice. Vera commented on how organized everything was. Arthur stayed mostly silent, eyes occasionally sweeping the bookshelves, the coffee table, the hallway, like he was still trying to piece together the woman who lived here. Over dessert, store-bought lemon tarts, I sat back and waited. I knew it was coming. I just didn't know who would say it first. Vera cleared her throat. "We didn't know," she said, eyes fixed on the rim of her teacup. "What you'd done, what you were doing, how far you'd gone." I nodded slowly, setting down my fork. "You didn't ask. You didn't want to know." Silence followed. The heavy, respectful kind. The kind that says more than a dozen apologies ever could. Arthur reached down beside him and lifted the frame he'd brought in. "This hangs in my office now," he said, turning it so I could see. It was the article from the Pinnacle hallway plaque. My photo, my quote. He tapped the glass gently. "Should have done that with your commissioning photo years ago." I didn't cry, but I did swallow hard before replying. "Thank you." Gregory shifted in his seat, looked down at his hands, then back at me. "You weren't just ahead of us," he said. "You were somewhere we didn't even know existed." I smiled, not to soften, just to acknowledge. "It was never about being ahead," I said. "It was about being." The moment stretched just long enough. Then I stood, collected the plates, and moved to the kitchen. "I'll put on some coffee." They stayed another hour, talked about work, about weather. Vera mentioned a friend from church. Arthur asked if I still ran. It was small, but it was something. After they left, I locked the door, leaned against it, and breathed. Later that week, I sat at my desk at the defense office, mentoring a new recruit on compliance protocols. She asked if it ever got easier, being underestimated. "No," I said, "but it gets quieter." Sometimes, justice doesn't come with applause. It comes with peace. With silence, where the shame used to echo. They don't define me anymore. I do. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's survival. And sometimes, it's the only way to hear your own voice again after years of being talked over. I used to think being acknowledged by my family would finally validate everything I've built. But what I discovered is this. Respect hits differently when it's no longer something you seek, but something you carry. To anyone watching this who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or edited out of your own story, I see you. Maybe you didn't grow up in a military family. Maybe your battlefield was a boardroom, a hospital ward, a kitchen table. But you know what it's like to be overlooked until the moment they realize they needed you all along. Here's what I'll leave you with. You don't need their permission to matter. You never did. So what about you? Have you ever kept something to yourself, your success, your struggle, just because you knew they wouldn't believe it anyway? Share your thoughts below. Or drop a 1 in the comments if this story hit home. And hey, where are you watching from? Let's connect. If this video moved you, if it stirred something inside you, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. And if it didn't, tell me why. Every voice matters here. We're just getting started.